Hi, this is Pastor Jay Stillinger, and today we're going to have our second lesson in our series entitled Foundations for Defending the Faith. In our first lesson, we talked about this word apologetics and the fact that it's from the Bible. Many times in the scriptures, it talks about this word in the Greek apologia, which means to give a defense or to make a case, we could say, for our faith. And we saw several things about that. We saw why it is biblical. We saw that several of the apostles were definitely apologists. They were defenders of the faith. And the fact that you and I as believers are commanded to be defenders of the faith as well. 1 Peter 3:15 being a classic example, a classic scripture, telling every believer that we're to be ready, we're to be prepared, we're to be trained to give a defense, to give an answer for the hope that is within us. Now, today we're going to talk about relative versus absolute truth. It's so important that we are established in the fact that truth does exist, that truth is knowable. In our world today, there's a battle for truth. In our world today, there is an attempt to kill truth, a death of truth in some ways, because people are believing so many lies. And we hear phrases like there is no truth, or no one knows the truth, or it's true for you but not for me, and a variety of other relativistic type of statements like that. Well, in our world today, that is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to know how to combat it in terms of refuting that idea that truth is a matter of opinion or truth is a matter of preference, because that is not the case. Absolute truth, objective truth, transcendent truth that is beyond the individual is something that is very much in existence and very much needed in order to function as an individual and as a society. So we're going to establish that today, because if we believe the Bible's true, and as we go and progress in this series and we talk about the existence of God, we talk about the reliability of the Bible and who Jesus is and the resurrection, we need to know that absolute truth exists. It's part of the process in order to build up in this series that which we're attempting to establish. And so I think you're going to be blessed by this. In Isaiah's book, we see here, the prophet Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 59, verses 4 and 5, he says this: "No one calls for justice, nor does any plead for truth." Notice that? Nor does anyone plead for truth. They trust in empty words and speak lies. They conceive evil and bring forth iniquity. It sounds just like our world today. In many ways, people are trusting in empty words. They're speaking lies. They are not pleading for the truth. They hatch vipers' eggs and weave spiders' web. He who eats of their eggs dies, and from that which is crushed, a viper breaks out. Basically, it's saying that those that believe the lies and depart from the truth, it's like they're eating poison, vipers' eggs, and they're weaving a web that traps people, and so there's bondage involved with that as well. Isaiah goes on and says this in verses 14 and 15. He says, "Justice is turned back and righteousness stands afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. So truth fails, and he who departs from evil makes himself a prey. Then the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no justice." So again, we see very much some words of the prophet Isaiah hundreds of years ago, but yet so applicable for the day in which we live, that truth is fallen in the street and truth fails. But as we progress into this teaching today, lesson 2, we're going to see how relativism, which we'll define in a little while as well, relativism just doesn't work, and absolute truth is absolutely necessary in order for individual as well as society to function effectively. You know, much of the world today is much like Pontius Pilate. When he had Jesus on trial and he was speaking to Jesus, it says this in John's Gospel, chapter 18, verses 37 and 38. "Pilate therefore said to him," to Jesus, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I've come into the world, that I should bear witness of the truth." Take note of that. Jesus said, "I've come into the world to bear witness of the truth." Then Jesus goes on and said, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Very interesting statement, very similar to what people say today. What is truth? It was almost a sarcastic note, a mocking type of note. What is truth? As if it didn't even exist in Pilate's mind. And then immediately after asking that question, he departs. He doesn't even wait for an answer. He had the very person who was and is truth standing before him. Jesus said, John 14:6, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Amen? And so he had truth standing ahead of him or right in front of him, and he says, "What is truth?" It didn't and didn't even wait for an answer. And then he goes out and he says, and when he had said this, it goes out in the latter part of this verse, verse 38, when he said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. And so after basically mocking the idea of truth, he goes out and makes a truth claim. His truth claim is, I find no fault in him at all. And so he actually contradicts himself in a very real way by saying this. But again, this is descriptive of our world today in many ways. What is truth? Does truth really exist? Or maybe something's true for you, but not for me. And so it's all a matter of opinion. And that's what relativism basically is, which we'll define further as we go on into this. But it's basically all truth is of our individual opinion. It's our preference. It's according to our whims. And so what might be true for me is not true for you, and vice versa. Well, you know, that kind of so-called truth is unrealistic, is not livable, and we're going to discover that as we go on in today's teaching. So what is truth biblically? What does it mean? First of all, from the Old Testament, truth means this. In the Hebrew, which is the predominant language, original language of the Old Testament, it means this. It involves both the ideas of firmness, stability, reliability, and sureness. From this root flows the twofold notion of truth as faithfulness and conformity to fact. A lot of interesting words in this. You'll notice stability. It's something you can stand on. It's something that is solid and firm and sure. It's not fluctuating. It's not a vacillating truth between individuals. It's something that is absolute for all people at all times and in all places. And then the latter part of this definition, it means conformity to the facts. And so it's got to line up with the facts of that which is happening, the facts of the object being referred to, or whatever the case may be. Another meaning of the Hebrew idea of this is this. It is what is authentic, reliable, or simply right. And so absolute truth has to do with what is just simply right. It's not this notion that, there's differences of rights and wrongs. In other words, different people might have a different idea what might be right and what is wrong. No, it's transcendent. It's beyond the individual. It's something that is either right or not right by every person's, for every person in every place. And so that's what absolute or objective truth is really all about. It goes on and says and refers to true justice from Zechariah 7:9, or as in swearing in a truthful, just, and righteous way. And so again, firmness, stability, reliability, faithfulness, conforming to the facts. Now, from the Greek, the primary meaning in the Greek, which is the New Testament, this is the definition, the revealed reality lying at the basis of and agreeing with an appearance, the manifested veritable essence of a matter. Hence, the reality appertaining to an appearance or manifestation. Now, that's a little bit on the confusing side perhaps, but the main emphasis is this is the reality. In other words, truth is reality. It's the way things really are. And so again, we're looking at something again. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of what our preference is. It's a matter of what it really is, what the facts really are. Now, what do we mean by absolute truth? Let's go on with this still a little bit further. It's telling it like it is. It's factual. That's what absolute truth is. Truth corresponds to its object. Real truth, absolute truth, corresponds to its object or to its reference. And then going on with this, that which describes an actual state of affairs. Conformity to fact or reality, exact accordance with that which is or has been or shall be. We're emphasizing some things and perhaps repeating some things, but in order to really grasp this, repetition is important sometimes. And then finally, it is purity from falsehood. And then going on to some other ideas about absolute truth, it is independent of the knower and his or her consciousness. So again, it's not a matter of personal opinion. It's independent. Absolute truth is beyond the knower. It's not a matter of our opinion, as opposed to relativism, which basically is based on one's opinion. It identifies things the way they actually are. It is absolute and independent, and it can never fail, diminish, change, or be extinguished. All right. So again, I mentioned this word before, and I say it again, just to get it really into our hearts. It's a transcendent, absolute or objective truth is transcendent truth. It's not a matter of whether we have an opinion or a preference. It's beyond. It's true for all people at all times and in every place. And this is so important for us to get. Now, some other truths about absolute truth, it's discovered, not invented. You just don't make it up. It's not something you make up. It's discovered. It's always existed. Truth has always existed when we're talking about this. It's transcultural. If something is true, it is true for all people, all places, all times, as I've already said to you. Some people say, well, different cultures have different views of what's right or wrong. And so for them, it might be right to have a certain thing or do a certain thing, and therefore true, as opposed to our culture that won't be. Well, one of the illustrations I think is very powerful in this is that of Hindus in India. They do not believe in eating a cow. They don't believe in eating a cow. They believe it's immoral to eat a cow, as opposed to Americans who have no problem in general with eating beef, eating a cow. All right, now, is that a difference in morality? Well, we have to think about the values behind both of those things in order to determine that. Why do Hindus in India, why do they feel it's wrong to eat beef or eat a cow? Well, they believe it's wrong because they believe that cow could be grandma. They believe in reincarnation. And so definitely they don't eat the cow because they don't believe in eating grandma. But you know what? You and I as Americans, generally speaking, we believe the same thing. We believe it's wrong to eat grandma. We just don't believe grandma's in the cow. And so the basic moral value is the same. There's not differences in morality per se. It's a difference in understanding where grandma is in this particular illustration, but the value is the same. We value grandma. We value human life. They value human life. And the thing is, they are mixed up in terms of reincarnation and thinking that grandma may have reincarnated as that cow, and so therefore they've got people starving on the streets while the cows walk by, and so again, deception will bring bondage every time. All right, so it is transcultural if it's absolute truth. It is unchanging even though our beliefs about truth change. Beliefs cannot change a fact, no matter how sincerely they are held. Think about that. There was a day when most everyone believed the earth was flat. They believed that. But believing the earth was flat didn't make the earth flat. The earth didn't change from being flat to round. The earth was always a sphere. It was always round. And so you can believe something is true, but that doesn't make it true. And so again, beliefs cannot change a fact, no matter how sincerely they are held. Now, people expect absolute truth in every area practically except for morality and religion. That's usually the two areas that they get wanting to go into relativism or a matter of opinion. They think morality should be a matter of opinion or preference, and religion, etc. But in every other area, pretty much, they want absolute truth. For example, your loved ones, your children, your spouse, you want absolute truth. You want your spouse to be absolutely faithful to you, not relatively faithful to you. That is just the way it is. We don't want them lying to us either. Doctors, we want the right medicine. We want the right prescription. We don't want them to just throw out just anything. We want the absolute truth from our doctors, from our physicians. Also, how about stockbrokers? We want to know the exact truth. We don't want anything vacillating and just what their opinions are. We want to know really what's the case. What is the situation with our stocks or our investments and what have you. Also, in terms of courts, we want them to convict only the truly guilty. We want them to have absolute truth. We want them to judge righteously and correctly. Isn't that correct? Amen? And so these things are important. Now, other ideas of this or other examples of this, I should say, employers, we want them to tell us the truth and pay us fairly. We want airlines to be safe, and we want them to assure us of that safety and be telling us the truth, don't we? All right? And we want pilots that are sober. Summing it up in this way, we could say this. We want the truth from advertisers. We don't want lying advertisers. We want them to tell the truth. Advertisers, teachers, politicians. We assume that road signs, medicine bottles, and food labels reveal the truth. In fact, we demand the truth for almost every facet of life that affects our money, relationships, safety, and our health. In fact, our lives could be in danger if we get the wrong message. If we don't get absolute truth about certain things, our lives could be in danger. It could be a matter of life and death. So we ask the question, so what about absolute truth? Well, think about it. Think about all these things that better be telling us the absolute truth. If there's poison, if there's danger, whatever it may be. If we don't know the absolute truth about many things, we're going to have a problem. If we can't know truth as it is, then we might find ourselves in a bit of trouble. And so again, we need absolute truth. We need objective truth. And really, intuitively, we know that. We know that we need these things. And again, it's mostly in morality and religion that people want to have relativistic or a matter of opinion or preference type of truth. And it never was that way before. Let's talk about what relative truth is in a little bit more detail. The definition of relative truth is this: relativism is the philosophical position that all points of view are equally valid and that all truth is relative to the individual. And so again, the idea is basically this. We could say it this way: everyone decides for themselves what's right and what's wrong. What a dangerous world to live in if everyone is deciding for themselves what's right and what's wrong. A lot of issues, a lot of problems with that kind of mentality. A relativist, therefore, believes there's no right and wrong. Anyone's truth is relative to himself. Also, everyone should be tolerant. No one should view another's actions as morally wrong. Thirdly, there's no absolute truth or God. Now again, a relativist, a real relativist, is going to claim to believe all these things, that there's no right or wrong. If there's no right or wrong, and everybody chooses for themselves, then, Hitler didn't do anything wrong. No one can accuse him of any kind of atrocity, killing nearly 6 million Jews. He didn't do anything wrong because it was right for him. Well, obviously, that doesn't make any sense at all. But yet that is what the relativist believes if he is consistent in his relativism. All right? Everyone should be tolerant. No one should judge. No one should determine anybody wrong about anything. And again, I think that you're beginning to see the problems with this. The world has confused truth with taste or with preference. And so with this illustration, I think that you might be able to see this a little bit better. There was a time when matters of taste, preferences, with regard to cuisine, your food, your dress, music, dance, social matters, manners, and artistic preferences, and all of that, that was a matter of taste. But then there were the matters of truth. History, math, science, philosophy, morality, and religion. Traditionally, religion and morality were always under a matter of truth and not a matter of taste. But in our world today, people want to put it under the matters of taste, and that's where we get into trouble every single time. You ask a relativist if something is wrong, and they may say, no. If it's right for you, then it's fine. It's right for you, then that's fine. Well, you can tell better whether they really believe that, not so much by what they say, but how they react to when they are wronged. Because if you steal from them, they immediately will say that was wrong. Well, how could it be wrong? You said that if I think it's right, it was right for me to steal from you, and so how can you say it's wrong? You see, their reactions really speak louder than their words in terms of being a relativist. If they're a relativist and everybody chooses what's right or wrong, well, try kicking them in the shin and see if they think that was wrong. But you say, you know what, felt right for me. Well, I think, again, you can see how this kind of falls apart, this relativistic kind of thinking. Relativism has a lot of problems to it, and we can see that from the fact that they can't accuse others of wrongdoing, they can't complain about the problem of evil, they can't place blame or accept praise, they make charges of unfairness and injustice. That reminds me of a story of a philosophy student who wrote a paper once on the fact, in his mind, that there are no objective or absolute moral truths. And he wrote the whole paper on that, and from a writing perspective, from a research perspective, he should have got an A on that, but the professor took one look at the title and he decided, well, nothing's right or wrong, there's no moral absolutes, no fairness, no justice, so I'm giving this guy an F. He wrote F on there and said, I don't like blue folders. Well, that philosophy student came running into his office complaining and saying, that's not fair, that's not just, you can't give me an F because I used a blue folder. And the professor said, well, isn't this the paper that said there is no justice, there is no right or wrong? And the student said, yes, that's right. He said, well, I don't like blue folders, so the F stands. Well, I think the student might have gotten the message as to how his whole subject was off and couldn't work in real life. Relativists can't improve their morality. Why can't they? To improve morality implies that there's something lacking in morality to start with. Well, if you don't think there's any lack in morality, if anything goes, then you can't improve in morality because that would be a contradiction. Relativists can't hold meaningful moral discussions for obvious reasons, and relativists can't promote the obligation of tolerance. They can't promote the obligation of tolerance. Now, as I've said before, relativism is impossible to live by. And really, they are absolutists, but they don't even realize it, perhaps, or they won't admit it. But in a very real way, relativists really are absolutists. And how do we know? They believe the following to be true for everybody. They believe the following things are the absolute truth for every person. They believe that you should not say that someone else is ever wrong. They believe that's an absolute because they say that's against relativism. You cannot say anybody else is wrong. They're making a truth claim. They're saying that that's an absolute truth. You cannot do that. Also, all views are equally acceptable. They believe everyone should feel that way. And so again, that's an absolute statement that they're saying. They should not impose morality on others, etc. You ought to be tolerant and should not judge is another thing that they believe is true for everybody. And so that's an absolute truth for the relativists. Again, showing that they are not pure relativists and that it's impossible to live by because they actually are absolutists when it comes to these things. And then finally, you ought to be open-minded. You ought to be open-minded. So again, they're telling people what they ought to be as an absolute truth, contradicting their stance of being a relativist. Now, how do we recognize when statements are of a relativistic nature and therefore false? How do we recognize that? Well, there's a law of logic called the law of non-contradiction. It's the first law of logic, and it's very important that we understand this before we end this particular session. This principle means this, or is defined as this: opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense. It's impossible. All right, so as an example of this, it helps us to discover then what is false. Notice this as an example. Opposite ideas, remember the meaning. Opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense. In other words, the earth can't both be round and not round at the same time. That contradicts the law of non-contradiction, right? And so again, it cannot happen. How about this example? We've got Oxford professor John Lennox, who believes God exists. We've got another Oxford professor, which many of you may have heard of, Richard Dawkins, who claims that God does not exist. Can they both be right? They both can't be right. It's impossible. You can't have one saying God exists, the other one God does not exist, and have both of them right. Relativists will say, you know what? They're both right. It's right for them. But that's impossible. That cannot be truth. And so one has to be right. They both can't be right. I happen to believe that John Lennox is right. And I hope that you do as well, that God does indeed exist, which will be a few sessions ahead as we deal with the existence of God, or arguments for the existence of God. How about this one? Can all religions be right? Can all religions be true? That's something you hear a lot today. Is that possible for all religions to be true? Well, let's look at a contrast between Christianity and Islam, because that's, of course, a predominant thing in people's minds, Islam today. And people, relativists, often say all religions are true. They all teach the same thing. They just use different phrases or different terminologies, but that is false. That is not true. Again, opposite ideas cannot both be true in the same way and in the same time. All right, now notice Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. Islam, he's not the Son of God. In Christianity, Jesus died on the cross for the sins of all mankind. In Islam, Jesus did not die on the cross at all. In Christianity, Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. In Islam, Jesus did not rise from the dead. Now, these are just some examples. I have more. But how can they both be true? They're opposite ideas. Obviously, they break the law of non-contradiction. They break that law of logic called the law of non-contradiction. Now, going on with Christianity, God's Son sent to die for you. In Islam, Muslim Son sent to die for Allah. And then fundamentalists under Christianity are told to love their enemies, but fundamentalists under Allah or Islam are told to kill their enemies. And then Christianity, man was created for fellowship with God, but under Islam, man cannot have fellowship with Allah. And so again, all religions cannot be true because they have different belief systems and opposite belief systems in many regards. And we see that example here with Christianity versus Islam. It's impossible. The law of non-contradiction is undeniable. It exists even with people that deny it. They can't help but operate in it. They just can't help it. All right? And so it is undeniable. Even they that use it, or deny it, I should say, still use it, whether they realize it or not, because it's part of our nature. This law of non-contradiction, opposite ideas cannot both be true. All right, now, One Muslim scholar from ancient days said this, and I think you'll maybe enjoy this or get a kick out of this, and really, I don't think you'll be surprised that this was a Muslim scholar. He said, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not being beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not being burned. And so again, he's making that point that you cannot deny the law of non-contradiction. Opposite ideas cannot both be true. Being beaten and not beaten cannot be both the same, right? Etc. And so I believe you're getting the point. Now, as I mentioned to you about absolute truth, there are some objections to absolute truth, and some of these I've already mentioned to you. We're going to look at how to refute them and how to use the law of non-contradiction in order to recognize when a statement is made that cannot be true. It refutes itself. We'll look at this real briefly here today. Here's some of the statements again. There is no truth. You can't know the truth. All truth is relative. No one has the truth, and you ought not judge. These are just some examples of objections against absolute truth. Well, how do we refute these things? How do we look at these things? Well, the greatest tool that we have in answering these kinds of statements is that you apply the statement to itself. You apply the claim to itself and see if it stands up under that scrutiny. And these claims do not stand up under this scrutiny. Let me give you an example here. Let's say, for example, that someone says this. Someone were to say, I can't speak a word in English. Do you see anything wrong with that statement? I cannot speak a word in English. Well, the answer to that, to prove that it's contradictory, is didn't he just say that in English? And so it's contradictory. He broke the law of non-contradiction by saying that. Now, here's some others. Note these things. There is no truth. Now, many people say that today. How would you respond? How do you apply that claim to itself? Well, you would apply the claim to itself by saying, is that true? Someone that says there is no truth. Well, is that true? They're claiming it as truth that there is no truth. And so again, it's self-refuting, a self-defeating statement. Again, a relativistic statement that does not hold up to scrutiny. It contradicts itself. Another example of this, another relativistic statement that you hear today, you can't know truth. Well, what would be the way that we would apply that to itself? Then how do you know that's true? How do you know that statement is true that you can't know truth? Again, you apply the claim to itself. And then another example, all truth is relative. Well, what would be our response? How do we apply that to itself? Well, we would ask this question, is that a relative truth? If all truth is relative, is that a relative truth? Again, it cancels itself out, doesn't it? By saying that. See, you cannot make those statements and have them hold up because they contradict each other. They contradict themselves when they say those kinds of phrases. Also, there is no such thing as absolute truth. Are you absolutely sure? The one thing the relativist is absolutely sure of is that there is no absolute truth. Again, relativism is impossible to live by and does not hold up even to logic. It contradicts itself. Now, going on, another statement to give you more examples of this, you should doubt everything. Well, should you doubt that? Should you doubt that statement that you should doubt everything? Again, doesn't hold up, does it? Another one, there's no truth in anything but science. And so the question of that is that a scientific truth? Is that a scientific statement? Absolutely not. That's not a scientific statement. That's a philosophical statement that there's no truth in anything but science. That's not a scientific statement whatsoever. It's a philosophical statement. And so again, it refutes itself. It's self-defeating. How about this one? You ought not judge. Boy, isn't that one of the most popular things people say today? You ought not judge. Well, the truth is, by saying that to someone, you are judging them. You're judging them when you say you ought not judge. That's a judgment statement. And so again, it also is contradicting its very self. You apply the claim to itself. All right, so refuting relativism. Let's see how you can refute it. Just to put it in a nutshell here. If all truth is relative, then the statement all truth is relative would be absolutely true. If it is absolutely true, then not all things are relative, and the statement that all truth is relative is false. Did you get that? Very important. And then, if there are no absolute truths, then you cannot believe anything absolutely at all, including that there are no absolute truths. Therefore, nothing could be really true for you, including relativism. So to sum this up today, let me just make these statements again. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are never possible. You can believe everything is true, but everything can't be true. The law of non-contradiction, opposite ideas, cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. All right, that law of non-contradiction has to exist. It's something that is there. It's innate. It's part of life. It's part of our makeup. It exists whether we believe in it or not. Relativism does not work, and absolute truth cannot be denied without being affirmed. So you cannot deny it by saying there is no absolute truth without just making an absolute truth statement, and so you confirm it. And so, in this session today, this lesson 2, we've talked about relative versus absolute truth. I trust that you've been blessed and helped by this to understand that truth does exist. Truth is knowable, and primarily it's knowable through God, through His Word. And as we progress in this series, you're going to be benefited greatly by these things. So again, download the notes, follow along, and be blessed by it. God bless you. Until next time.